So when I was filming my last video where I talked about my experience with posting my life online for over 10 years, I realized I now have a video between my two channels that focuses very heavily on my life beginning in late middle school through my post-grad era of life, but I don't have anything where I talk about my childhood whatsoever. I realized it would make a lot of sense to make a video where I talk about the events in the earlier part of my life. This is basically the setup or prelude to my previous video. So section 1 of this video, I have tentatively labeled the performing arts and crafts. So now YouTube has become a very artistic and creative venture, but it was definitely not my first artistic venture. Throughout my life, I've been involved in the arts in various forms. So in this section, I want to cover basically the arts. So in terms of the performing arts, one of the big things that influenced my life during my childhood and the beginning of my teen years was dance. So my first experience with dance was when I started taking ballet classes in middle school. But before that, I had actually taken a couple gymnastics classes around when I was 7 years old. The second year that I took gymnastics, the prices at the studio I was attending raised significantly. So unfortunately, it was no longer an affordable option for our family. Looking back on it, I think if that had been financially feasible, I definitely would have continued gymnastics. I love doing gymnastics. I really liked doing floor work and I liked bar work. I really didn't like the balance beams though. I was quite scared of the balance beams actually. So between the ages of about 8 and 10, I didn't do anything performative really like that. A lot of my peers at the time were taking dance classes and I was quite jealous that they were taking dance classes. I wanted desperately at this time to start taking dance classes. So I asked my parents, they said no. I would continually ask, I would say, hey mom, hey dad, I really want to take dance classes. And they would say no. So there was a time for about 2 years where I was begging to take dance classes and I was continually being told no. But I had concocted a plan to convince my parents to let me take dance classes, and it actually worked. At this time, I had a library card, and it was one of the only useful tools I had at this point besides the internet. I went on my local library website and I looked up dance. I think I was just looking for anything dance related, and I found a DVD called Miss Christie's Dance Class. There would be a teacher who was basically just recording her dance class as she was teaching it. If I'm remembering correctly, there was a ballet version, I think a tap version, and I think a jazz version. The idea was you basically do the warm-ups and the routines along with the teacher. So there was a period of time for maybe months where I'd watch this DVD, I would play it in my living room, and I would do the routine every single night. Was it very helpful in improving my skills? Probably not. Although it might not have been great for teaching me, although I did learn a lot of terminology. I think my parents realized at this time how serious and committed I was to the dance thing. And so I think the following year, when new dance classes started, I started taking ballet classes. The first class I ever took was basically a hybrid of a ballet lyrical class. They're both meant to be very pretty and are very technical heavy. I unfortunately never got to the point where I could take point classes. The year that I would have started taking point classes was actually the year that I quit dance, just because at this point I was in high school, I was taking AP classes. You know, it's high school, there was a lot more of a focus on academics at that time. I was just preparing for college applications. So although I stopped taking dance classes at a dance studio, I actually took dance classes at my high school. So in my high school, there were a couple of art credits I needed to take to graduate from that high school. So I filled most of those credits as well as some of my elective credits with dance classes. If you had never taken dance before, they just start you at the first level. If you had taken dance classes before, I believe you could audition essentially to start in level 2 or level 3. I didn't care that much at this point. Like, I was just taking it for fun and for the credit. So I just started at level 1. Throughout the school year, the teacher would, teach us like dance classes, technique, and she would teach us several different dance routines, 3 or 4 different dance routines. And at the end of the year, we would put on a show, like we would perform in front of the entire school. I know 4 dances, it sounds like a lot, but when you have an entire semester and you're working on it every single day, you'll be fine. Like, you have plenty of time to learn the dance. Junior and senior year, I focused a lot more on AP classes, so I wasn't taking dance classes, but that was probably my favorite class in all of high school. I loved it. My other experience with dance, which was definitely much more of a casual experience, when I was, I think, 12, I performed at my school talent show with a group of my friends with a dance that my teacher had actually choreographed. We had costumes, we had hats. It was quite beautiful. I love dance, and I would love to take dance classes as an adult at some point, just for fun. Another form of the performing arts that I was definitely very heavily involved in when I was younger was theater. I loved theater. I was involved in it in several different ways, starting when I was about 10 and up through middle school. Same thing with dance. I would have been more involved with it in high school if I wasn't so worried about, academics and AP classes. First play I was involved in was a community theater play with a local community theater group. This was my first experience with community theater. I went in and auditioned. All the plays I was participating in were also musicals, so there was a singing audition. I'm gonna be honest, I am a very mediocre singer, so I didn't love the whole singing part, but I loved the acting part enough that it made the whole thing worth it. So first play I was in, I was 10 years old. Just for the sake of Googleability, I'm not gonna tell you what the plays were because this is from my hometown and I'd rather keep that private. This was also a children's production, so everyone who was involved in this play was very young. It was specifically focused on kids. When I was 12, I auditioned with that same group. At this point, I was one of the oldest in that group, so I had a much, much larger role at this time. The auditions would happen at the end of the school year, so around May, and we would put on the performance at the very end of the summer. So we had a couple months to get it right. Community theater is probably the best memory of my childhood. I loved it. On to school plays. I was a part of 2 school plays. The first one was when I was 10, and the second one was when I was 12. The age cap for these plays was a little bit higher, so I wasn't the oldest at this point. First play I was in was directed by the music teacher in the school at that point, and the second was directed by the school teacher that I had at the time. There was also a group I was involved in at one point that traveled around the country and auditioned kids to be part of a play that they would do routinely in a bunch of different areas. The main roles in this play were played by, older teenagers, 17, 18-year-olds, but this was probably the biggest production I was in. Theater was also really interesting for me because I'm a very introverted person. I am my most extroverted when I'm on stage for whatever reason. So all of the aforementioned plays happened between age 10 and age 12, I think. So there was a very short period of time when I was involved in a lot of different theater productions. Around the same time, between 10 and 12, I also started writing plays to perform in my school, not at the whole school level, but at a class level. I wanted to find any way I could to involve performing with learning. In my classes in this age range, there were these historical based books that would be very focused on specific historical events. I would write historical fiction plays based on characters who lived through these events, and I would recruit my classmates to play parts in this play, and I would convince my teachers to take us to the school auditorium so we could perform it. One of the plays I was in, I actually choreographed a musical number for this specific play. I was very dramatic at that time, and I put on 2 of these plays. And my last experience to date with performing in a theater setting was a theater class I took in high school. Again, this was just for the elective credit. Just like the high school dance class I took, it was very casual and unserious. It was just for the credit. Pretty sure a lot of the people taking that class didn't really want to be there or weren't really interested in theater, but I really enjoyed it. So in the last section, we're moving on. I guess you could call this the crafts, but I'm using that term very loosely. So my freshman year of high school, again for an elective credit, I took a pottery class. I really enjoyed this pottery class. The final project I did was probably the best project. You were basically supposed to make a teapot inspired by a garden, and you were allowed to interpret that however you wanted. So what I did was I made this like a standard teapot, except The lid of the teapot had a flower design on the top. I got to use the wheel to make this pot, and I glazed it myself. It had this really pretty purple glaze. The teapot is not usable, unfortunately. It would have been really interesting if it was. Right now it's at my parents' house, but I will probably keep that forever. So I've labeled section 2 of this video Learning Curve because these are stories of things I've learned or events taking place at school. Most of them taking place at school. But I did in fact learn things when I wasn't in school. So if you thought I was done talking about my creative outlets while in elementary and middle school, you are wrong. So besides gymnastics and dance and theater and making YouTube videos, another creative outlet I used was writing. And with my interest in writing came some very memorable formative experiences in my early years. So the first memory I'm going to share with you, I think, is my favorite academic memory relating to the early years of school. One of the best things my school ever decided to do was give us the opportunity to partner with a book publishing company and make our own hardbound books. I had the opportunity to write whatever book I wanted, make illustrations for this book, send it over to a publishing company, and they would turn this book into a real hardbound book. These books were private. You couldn't view them online anywhere. You couldn't purchase them. They were strictly for your own personal use. But this is something that I would look forward to the entire school year. My absolute favorite part, like I said, of the academic part of school. One of my favorite parts about reading these books back is you can see the drastic jump and improvement in grammar, storyline, ability to develop characters between the ages of, it was actually 9 and 11. So those are definitely the most legitimized books I wrote. I already told you about the plays that I wrote earlier in this video, but there are a couple of books that I wrote on physical paper that never got hardbound. So when I was in 2nd and 3rd grade, I wrote these ghost story books. So there were, I think, 3 or 4 girls, which were the main characters in the book. I really hope I can find these books. They may have gotten thrown out, but I have such vivid memories of them. I originally had only written 1 book, but my younger sister at the time was obsessed with these books, so I kept making sequels to them. It was literally stapled together construction paper with crayon illustrations on the inside. It's gonna take me a while to find them, but I'll try my best if they still exist. Next story I have for you in this section is about class camping trips that I took. I talked to my boyfriend about this earlier. I don't know if this is a normal thing to do class camping trips. I think he said he went on one, but please comment if you know anyone who went on class camping trips. I went on my first class camping trip in 3rd grade. I went on 2 more class camping trips in 4th and 5th grade, and then I went on 2 camping trips in 6th grade. So clearly I was just a pro at camping by this point. I grew up in the Northeast, so I lived in an area where it was way too cold to go on camping trips before April, and I would say after September it would be too cold to do it at that point. So the class camping trips were always in May. I always envisioned it as a marking of the end of the school year, even though it wasn't totally the end of the school year. We ended school in June, but as a kid I didn't like school, so I was very excited that summer was coming, even though my summers were quite boring. Most of the time I didn't do anything. I actually think one of the reasons that I became so creative and I wrote so much and I liked theater was because my summers, at least the summers that I didn't do drama rehearsals and was involved in plays, were quite boring. So I had to find ways to entertain myself. The first class camping trip was in 3rd grade, and it was with all of the 3rd graders in the school. There was 4 teachers total. 3 of them I didn't know and had never met. So how it would work is parents would basically volunteer to go on the camping trips with their kids. People who own tents would volunteer to bring tents. If you had a larger tent, there would be 3 or 4 kids in a tent. And it was divided by gender. And if you had a smaller tent, it would most likely be the parent or the kid. This is similar to the way it worked as I got older. I'm gonna be honest, I don't remember that much about this camping trip, although I know that we camped in an area that was very close to a waterfall. So the big events that were actually planned was a bonfire for dinner on night 1. Day 2, we would hike to see the waterfall. And besides that, you basically filled the time with whatever you wanted to do. This was also before kids had phones, so it was like, if your parents weren't chaperoning, you would have no idea what your kids were doing until you got back. Now, the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade camping trips were all class specific. It would be the teacher, the teacher's assistant, the entire class of children, and chaperones, any parent volunteers who wanted to be involved. The 4th and 6th grade camping trips were to the same area as the 3rd grade camping trip. The 5th grade camping trip was to a different area. With the 4th and 6th grade camping trips being to the same campground as the 3rd grade camping trip, why? Okay, did I say cramping trip? With the 4th and 6th grade, why am I like this? With the 4th and 6th grade camping trips being to the same location as in 3rd grade, once again, we did the waterfall hike and we would have an evening bonfire. But this time, as the kids were a little bit older, there was a lot more student involvement in the preparations and actual function of the camping trip. Students would basically be put on meal duty, so you would either have to prepare breakfast, lunch, or dinner. So dinner crew would be the night of night 1, and breakfast and lunch crew would be day 2. In 4th and 6th grade, I got put on breakfast crew. It might be because I was just a good kid, so they were like, I guess she's not gonna put up a fight about this, but I'm gonna be honest, I really hated being on breakfast crew because I had to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning. It was the same sort of potluck deal as in 3rd grade for the remainder of the camping trips. When I was in 6th grade though, my teacher held a graduation ceremony for the 6th graders. It was actually pretty emotional. I didn't expect it to be emotional at the time, even though I knew it was coming. But we were given plaques, which was essentially pictures that she had taken of us throughout the entire year. And if you've seen a butterfly wind chime in previous videos hanging in my room, she actually gave us that at that graduation ceremony. I currently keep that with my graduation tassels from high school and college. I very much view them as essentially closing of chapters of these particular periods of my life. So when I was writing the outline for this video, I had initially intended to include more stories, including some excerpts from my childhood diary. After editing this video and cutting it down, I realized this video would be far too lengthy if I included those extra stories. That being said, I do really like a lot of the stories that I was initially intending to share with you. And if you would be interested in seeing a sequel to this video in the future or seeing any of my childhood diary entries, please let me know because I would love to share them with you. But with that being said, I wanted to thank you so much for watching this video in its entirety. And if you did like this video, my recommendation for your next video to watch would be the I've been posting my life for over 10 years online video. That video, although it was posted prior to this one, is essentially the follow-up to this video and covers the following 10 years in my life.